what is my perspective on 50,000 Jasmy? Because the other day someone asked me if 50,000 Jasmy was good enough. Even though nothing I say is financial advice, I wouldn't find that as such a disappointing figure, personally for me, even though it's going to depend on a case-by-case basis, because let's imagine in a make-believe scenario, maybe Jasmy went to the price of 25 cents. At that point, 50,000 Jasmy, we times that by 25 cents, that would be 12,500. Now, people like to say, who cares about that amount? Well, personally for me, even though again it's going to depend, I wouldn't find that too disappointing because if let's say I just saved 5 grand out of that 12,500, I'm not saying even 50%, just 5 grand out of that, and let's say I use that for the next cycle, and maybe during the next cycle, hypothetically it does a 10x, then that 5 grand becomes 50 grand. Now, that's considering a lot of factors. However, this is just a make-believe scenario. However, a lot of people that I know out there, they don't have that much in their savings right now, let alone in their portfolio or something like that. They don't have that much. Now, a lot of people that I know out there, they're either traveling consistently, eating out consistently as well, just buying random depreciating assets, and also on top of that, having car payments for a car that they probably, I think, in some cases don't need something that expensive. However, even besides all that, that's just from what I realized from some of my friends. So I don't think it's such a bad amount. And I see a lot of people out there, they sometimes have this sort of notion where they're always focused on what other people have. Like, for instance, let's say in a make-believe scenario, someone has 1 Bitcoin, another person comes in, they have 10 Bitcoin, and then the person who has 1 Bitcoin may sometimes feel like, oh man, this person has 10, what is this all about? And then they, in some cases, might not feel that sort of enthusiastic. However, in my perspective, let's say I put that in the case of Jasmy. To me, it's not about what other people have. In my perspective, it's about what I can do with what I have. So if let's say the standard for someone is a certain amount, and let's say maybe in my case I can only have a certain amount, it's not like I'm going to be focused on what other people have. Again, it's about working with what I have instead of focusing on what other people have. So in the grand scheme of things, sometimes people like to say, oh, is 50,000 Jasmy good enough? 100,000? It really depends on a case-by-case basis. But personally for me, again, I just wouldn't be too worried about what another person has that I don't have. I just be focused on what I can do with what I have. So 50,000, I get it. Sometimes people may think it's not that much, but I don't think it's such a disappointing amount in a make-believe scenario in my perspective. However, people like to say, okay, 25 cents, that's around a 14x from here. However, to me, that also doesn't seem too disappointing because if I take a look at Bitcoin and Ethereum, some people are arguing Bitcoin 300 grand, something like Ethereum 10 grand for maybe this cycle. But in both cases, that's less than a 3x from where they are as of right now. Again, so if I consider that is around a 14x, too disappointing? I don't think so. I'm totally aware that there's probably going to be some other projects that are hypothetically going to do better than this. And still, even despite that, I still don't mind because I think Jasmy fits what I'm looking for. It's not a microcap, and it's also not something that feels a little bit dinosaur-like where the market cap is just too massive. If my goal was a microcap, I would not be looking at Jasmy whatsoever. But then I want to look at Jasmy because it fits my criteria where the market cap isn't too massive, but it's not too small either. So it does give me a sense, a little bit of stability, even though, of course, it doesn't have the stability of like, Bitcoin, for instance. I'm totally aware of that, but just the kind of okay market cap, the presence I think is good. I think the community is amazing. I think Jasmy is good exchange listings. So again, just fits what I'm looking for. And at the price of 25 cents, considering current circulating supply, market cap at that point would be around $12.5 billion. Keep in mind, Dogecoin exceeded this by over 70 billion back in 2021, and that was years ago. So I don't think this is too ridiculous. However, even if let's say Jasmy just went to 12.5 cents, so that's around a 7x from here, give or take, even at that point, the idea of that, I would much rather prefer it over Bitcoin and Ethereum for the next 6 to 10 months. I'm not saying 10, 20 years later, I'm just saying, let's say in the next 6 to 10 months, if someone said Bitcoin, Jasmy, or Ethereum, personally in my case, I would say Jasmy, even though I can't speak on anyone's behalf. However, sometimes people like to say, oh, Jasmy doesn't have the fundamentals to kind of back that up. Well, I disagree with that, arguably, because Jasmy's focused on a market that there's not that many competitors. I mean, let's think about this. What projects exist that are reputable and famous that are focused on decentralizing data storage? Arguably, I think there's 5. Now, what are those 5? Jasmy, Filecoin, Siacoin, Arweave, and Storage. But it's actually spelled Storj, but sometimes people call it Storage. Some other people call it storage, but then it depends on a personal preference. So that's pretty much 5 reputable competitors for a market. Keep in mind, the global data storage market that is predicted to be worth nearly $800 billion by 2030, according to Fortune Business Insights. For what that market size could be for that sector, it's kind of crazy to think about how within this space there's only arguably 5 major and reputable competitors. So I don't think that this is a case where there's 20, 30, or 40 reputable competitors like what we see sometimes with other sectors, like for instance NFTs, blockchain gaming. We take a look at also something like AI, where there seems to be a bunch of projects that are kind of on the rise that are focused on that. However, in this case, there's not like too many that are reputable. So I kind of find this somewhat of a unique position, I would say, where the market hypothetically is predicted to be pretty massive in the future, but then there's not that much competitors, I would say, currently. And I think Jasmy has the cool factor, because let's think about this. Even though Filecoin is, I think, more famous than Jasmy right now, when was the last time I kind of heard really people talk much about anything when it comes to like Arweave or like, something like Scicoin or Storj? It doesn't seem like there's that much talk going on with it. They're not small projects, by the way, but then the hype and attention, it doesn't seem like it's really talked about that much. Of course, I do believe in those projects and I've talked about those projects, but in the grand scheme of things, it doesn't feel like the hype is there. Considering this market, again, data storage, Jasmy seems to be the one that has the most cool factor. And I think it's because arguably it may be down to its management team, which there's a lot of people there who used to work at places like Sony. So I think that's another bonus. Not to mention, Jasmy allegedly is the first ever legally compliant cryptocurrency in the country of Japan. And I think that's also another cool point right there, because if that was such an easy thing to achieve, I'm pretty sure other projects out there would kind of talk about that and say, oh yeah, we became this or became that. But not really many projects talk about it. And I think it's because achieving something like that is pretty difficult, arguably. And even Jasmy has the nickname of the Bitcoin of Japan because of that. However, of course, when it comes to Bitcoin, it is way different than Jasmy due to many factors. Like, for instance, even just the maximum supply is 21 million. We take a look at this one. Again, there's a bunch of different factors. But just having that nickname, having that sort of reputation, I think just makes it kind of the coolest one out of the other competitors that it has right now. And we have to take a look at how Jasmy seems to be heading in the right direction, I think arguably fundamentally, because we have to take a look at, for instance, Junction, which is an incubation project under Jasmy. It's a layer 2 for decentralized AI. And it's allowing for users to share their GPU, graphic processing unit, resources for rendering, for instance, AI tasks. Again, there's a bunch of projects out there that are focused on AI, but when I consider just kind of the complete package when it comes to Jasmy, again, the emphasis towards decentralizing data storage, I take a look at, again, something like Junction, which is often associated when it comes to Jasmy. I just like the whole vibe here, and even though Jasmy may not have the greatest adoption of all time, I think the story, the narrative, and sort of the vibe, I think kind of resonates with me. So for me, as of right now, there's only one thing that I think I can do when it comes to Jasmy, and that is just holding. Because if I try to, focus on the exact moment in time Jasmy is going to do something, I won't be able to do that because I do not know the future. So instead, what am I going to do? I'm not going to be focused on things that are beyond my control. I'm going to focus on things that are within my control, and that is literally just by holding and just waiting. That's it. I'm more so focused on kind of the preparation and just consistently dollar cost averaging, holding and just waiting, as opposed to trying to find the exact moment in time, which again, I will not be able to do. So instead, I'm just going to be doing that. I'm not going to be pulling up some random price charts, drawing some random triangles, because quite frankly, I don't think that does anything. Like if I drew a triangle on a price chart, a falling wedge pattern or something like that, the market's not going to care about that. I see some other people out there, they make a video where they're just constantly adjusting that triangle on the price chart to kind of fit the narrative of what they drew to match the price chart. What is that? At that point, I'm just drawing. It just looks cool, but then what's the point? I'd rather talk about the fundamentals and just being patient and just focus on the preparation. That's what I'd rather do. Instead of trying to know the exact moment in time, I'm just constantly accumulating, holding, and just waiting. And feel free to subscribe if you enjoyed this video. I'd greatly appreciate it. It's been Lee the Captain, and I'll catch you all on the next one. I'm out. Peace. Bye.